So, Symphonique 1.0, my very first string synthesizer design and build. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about this project and its future also, since I do have some interesting stuff coming up based on this project. But first, let's talk about Symphonique, the very first version 1, courtesy of my girlfriend. So this is a digitally controlled, but otherwise a very analog string synthesizer. I originally got this idea from, really the thing was we had this M-Audio Keystation 49 MIDI controller that was sitting here gathering dust. We didn't need it all, we didn't use it, so it was either sell it or make something cool out of it. Well, I did have the idea of making a string synth, since that has been the one thing I haven't done at all. And then I discovered that M-Audio was being very cheeky, and they had hidden 8 holes for controls, for knobs, behind like a sticker here, and there were also all sorts of mounting brackets on the inside, so I have no idea for which model of their product line. I haven't found anything that looked like a Keystation like this with knobs, so well, whatever. So yeah, I just had to make Symphonique. Was quite a challenging project, this one, because there's not a whole lot of space in here. Especially since I wanted to keep the original electronics of the MIDI controller, so I can still use the MIDI functionality, and also cheat a little bit by just reading out the MIDI generated by M-Audio circuit, so I don't need to do keyboard scanning and all that fancy stuff. It's not that much of a problem. I've already built a couple of synthesizers that do all sorts of keyboard scanning, but this was just a bit easier, especially considering that I just had this narrow strip behind this front panel here for all the electronics. So yeah, I didn't have much space to fit an entire analog string synthesizer in there, and analog electronics in general can get quite complex and quite bulky, let alone a synthesizer. So, but I managed to do it, and it sounds pretty good. Yeah, I'm loving it. So, let's see if all these controls are, yeah, they're on the standard settings. Quite a big portion of this string synth is discrete. It's also quite simple. In fact, it's so simple I have decided to turn this into a module, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'm such a tease, but so let's go over the various functionality of the Symphonique 1, and I'll talk a little bit about the internals as I go over each section. So to the left here, most of this is still MIDI controller, the pitch bend, the modulation, and this volume slider. They're still connected to the original M-Audio circuitry. These 3 buttons, however, have been reassigned to be used for the string synthesizer, since I really have no use for them on a MIDI controller, in all honesty. And this first button here is the polyphonic or dual mode. Dual mode meaning that the polyphony will be halved, and that 2 DCOs per voice will be layered per note, really, and that's layered an octave up. So normally I have this note. Oh, it's still a rather cool patch, actually. So that's just using the internal envelopes. So pretty long times. Anyways, let's put this back to. Okay, so normally we have this note, it's just a single D, and now I can add another octave to it. So essentially just layers to DCOs per note. So you get a bit of a fuller sound with the same amount of notes being played. The other two buttons have to do with the chorus. One is the chorus on and off, the other is the LFO speed, which I still need to modify a little bit, but it does sound really cool already. So this is without chorus, with, and this is now with a fast chorus speed, as you can hear. And now with a slow. Fast again. Beautiful playing, and without. So yeah, that's the left section. Then there's all the new knobs I put on here. The first two knobs have to do with the DCOs really. I've designed DCOs in such a way that I can still get different waveforms out of them. They're all sawtooths. It's just a simple capacitor that charges up, and then a transistor in parallel to the capacitor to ground, which provides a discharge path for the capacitor to discharge when the clock signal is high. This means that you can vary the clock signal. It doesn't have to be a trigger pulse, normally for sawtooth waves, or a square wave for like these saw pulses. It can be multiple, I call them trigger pulses or trigger patterns. So the charging and discharge pattern of the capacitor becomes different, and you get all sorts of different sounds. So that's what this first knob controls. There's 4 different sounds, so this is pretty much the standard trigger kind of sound, the sawtooth. You can hear that on the low notes it gets a bit more pulsy. It's essentially a reverse pulse because the capacitor charges up to maximum voltage, around 4.5 volts. It kind of stays there until it gets discharged again. So you get a kind of a pulse down here, and then actually a true sawtooth for the higher notes. You also notice a slight amplitude, very slight amplitude difference between the high notes and the low notes, because of course for the high notes the capacitor gets less time to charge up to full voltage, so it will be like going through 3 volts or maybe 4 at most. But I kind of like that because it gives a bit more emphasis on the bass notes, the low notes that you play. Yeah, I just really like that. So let's go over the various sounds that these trigger pulses generate, these clocks. So this is the normal sawtooth. This is a sawtooth with like an extra little sawtooth mixed in there. So it kind of gives that same octave effect as the dual mode does, but a little bit more subtle. Then we have the weird one. Don't know what this is really. This is essentially just like one longer trigger pulse with very tiny pulse after it. You get like these extra harmonic. Okay, and this is the. This one is kind of the same as the first one, but it is an octave lower. It goes really low. And it's slightly more. I guess this is slightly more like, I don't know, trombone-y, contrabassy. I don't know what would be applicable for this. Still fine doing that, but this is essentially what you get if you send just a normal square wave to these DCOs. So that's the waveforms. Now this second knob here has to do with the vibrato, which I haven't really fine-tuned yet. I just realized. It's gonna sound a little bit weird, but will be improved. In all honesty, it sounds really depressing. But yeah, this needs to be smoothed out a lot more. Like, the problem with using the 16-bit integers for the phase counter and also this for the incrementer amount is that you don't have like a big range. So if you add things like vibrato or pitch bend, like especially with the high notes, then like adding 1 to the incrementer would also already be like a semitone. So yeah, that is a bit of a faff, and of course it doesn't sound smooth because it sounds very steppy. I guess it sounds a little bit interesting, because for like this old vintage kind of detuned kind of string synth sound. But yeah, that needs to improve. But anyways, we have vibrato. The next section is the filter. It's actually this entire section. These are the envelopes, these gray ones. I'm gonna focus on this first. This is the cutoff and the resonance. Now there's 2 filters in here. Both get controlled by the same signals. The resonance is a dual potentiometer, so that controls the resonance from both filters at the same time. The cutoff is read out by the Arduino, which then generates an analog voltage through PWM. I've used again factorals for the filter and also for the VCAs, because I like to have physical separation between my Arduino and my analog circuitry, especially when it concerns resonant filters, because the noise from the PWM will often like bleed through, and yeah, it will reduce the audio quality really. So I always use factorals. Of course, it's also easier to implement because you have a variable resistor, so it's no faffery with transistors and exponential converters and all sorts of stuff. Of course, you do need to consider that a factoral does have a very exponential curve due to the way in light-dependent resistor works, and also an LED. But frankly, that's not a problem. I haven't actually compensated for any of these factoral-based synthesizers. Just yeah, it sounds fine. So, anyways, the filter. So cutoff. So it goes pretty low. Resonance. So you might notice that the cutoff only updates when I play a note. It's also something I need to update in the firmware, really. So you can just rotate the cutoff to whatever. The sound will adapt accordingly. Of course, the resonance is very direct since it's just in the analog signal path. So yeah, that's the filter. It's again one of my favorites, the standard 20 low pass filter. There's actually a really weird detail in this. Check my camera as well. Okay. There's very weird details concerning the DCOs and the filter. Because the filter also kind of acts as an active mixer for those 8 DCOs per channel. And the DCOs have, of course, a DC offset because the capacitor charged from 0 to around 4.5 volts. So somewhere around 2.25 volts you have the center of that voltage. So that's the DC offset, and of course the filter, and because of the way it's made, it will amplify that, and you won't have any audio because it's amplified to the positive rail voltage of the op amp. So I had to put a capacitor in between there, but because it also acts as an active mixer, that kind of screws with how that works. And that's actually the thing that gave this the sound it has. Like this more slightly high-passed, pulsy sound. Because especially when playing these high registers, you really get a very pure sine wave. But because of that capacitor in between the DCOs and the filter mixer, you get kind of some high-pass action going on, which kind of shapes that sawtooth in a way that it becomes a bit more of that brassy pulse that we all like from string synths. So that was actually an accident, which turned out to be, the core thing that made Symphonique. So, yeah, it shows sometimes you just don't know. I should really stop playing these chords. Beautiful. So last but not least, we have the envelopes. There's 4 knobs for 2 envelopes. The first 2 knobs are the attack and decay of the filter. The second 2 knobs are the attack and decay of the VCA. So essentially the amplitude. Now the filters and VCAs are paraphonic. So that was a bit of a faff to figure out, since I'm very used to either monophonic or polyphonic, and I've never designed anything truly paraphonic with VCAs before. The filter, sure, SQK1, the prototype, it's a paraphonic filter, and the final version will also have a paraphonic filter. Well, that's pretty much the only example I have, since other things are monophonic or digital. So, but yeah, so I'm just really used to having a VCA that's paraphonic as well. So what this means, if I can actually demonstrate this. I'm gonna do a little bit of attacks and decay. So if you play a high chord here, then the note attacks and then decays. Okay, sure. But when I play a low note somewhere, you'll hear that these notes are also playing again. That's because the audio of all the oscillators combined goes through one VCA. So that's something you need to get used to. But I kind of wanted to make it different as well. I wanted to have the filter to be an attack and decay, and then the VCA to be an attack and release. So you can do this and ring the notes. But with a paraphonic VCA, this is not really something that works well. So yeah, it's just like the oscillations play and stop playing when you release them again. So when I reset the VCA to standard values, it's essentially just doing nothing now. You'll hear that, as soon as I release the the keys, the oscillators will stop playing. But yeah, it and I suppose it's a bit more like a classic string synth in this way, because if I remember correctly, the first couple of string synthesizers back in the 80s, maybe even 70s, they were all paraphonic, and although the oscillators were quite a bit more complex than my string synth, but yeah, my string synth isn't huge. So yeah, that's all the controls and little oddities and details, really. Yeah, one thing I forgot: the envelopes are digital. They are generated by the Arduino, which sends these control voltages to the filter and VCAs to Vectorals. There you go. So that's the Symphonique 1. Now, let's talk about the Symphonique 2. Because I've been talking to a webshop owner and some other people who are really interested in having this as a DIY kit or module. Now I'm planning to design version 2 of Symphonique as a standalone module. I'm of course gonna make some design changes. I actually designed a voice, so a DCO, filter, VCF and VCA with just 3 transistors, a couple resistors and capacitors and whatnot. And I'm going to prototype that idea somewhere in the coming days. See if I get the same vibe, the same brassy sound that people like of Symphonique 1. And if I can make that so compact with still the same vibe, that means I'll be able to make a small fully polyphonic module. So fully polyphonic version of Symphonique. And I'm planning to sell this as a module through a partnership with someone else. So, well, of course, I'll need a couple of weeks of R&D, and I also want to improve the chorus somewhat. The way the chorus mixes on Symphonique 1 is not ideal yet. I'll probably make some changes in the internals of this at some point. And like tiny details, this was my very first string synth design and build, so obviously there are some things that are completely new to me and that I need to experiment further with, but the basis is there. So yeah, I'm planning to turn this into something really cool that you guys can buy and have a play with yourself. Not sure yet how DIY the module will be. Probably, since that's kind of my thing. So yeah, a standalone, probably DIY module, which will be controllable through MIDI, but is otherwise completely analog and gives you that vintage string synth vibe for, I don't know, $50. Of course, this, I still need to decide on all that, but I can say that it will be fairly cheap, since all the components used in here are just standard transistors, standard capacitors, standard resistors. The chorus units use PT200E99s. It's all very cheap and very standard. So yeah, you guys can expect a very affordable analog string synth module coming up somewhere this year, hopefully. Yeah, probably this year, unless I'm really slow. So yeah, that's Symphonique 1.0. I think my next video actually will be a teaser for SQK1, the final version, since I have the components all laying here on a pile to the right of me. So that's my next project. And there's something else I have to show actually. So I recently started helping a friend of mine out with a gambling with gambling machines. So he asked me to help prepare some of them, since he doesn't really have electronics knowledge, and I do. So, but yeah, this is one of the failed attempts. This is just way too corroded. I tried to replace some components and try to clean it up, bridge some gaps, but unfortunately this board just ain't having it. For those who are in the know, this is the Scorpion 1. But yeah, this is a pretty cool board because it has this chip on here. So this is the quite well-known AY38912A. There we go. Which is it's a sound chip. It's I guess you could call it a synthesizer chip. Essentially, it can generate square waves and these digital sawtooths, triangles. It has it has noise generators, and this all is in 3 channels. So you have 3 voices on this chip, and it sounds very chiptune and very retro. And it's actually used in quite a few popular computers back in the day. The ZX Spectrum, the MSX, I believe a variety of it was also used in the Altair TPC? I'm not sure anymore, I kind of forgot, but anyways, it was used a lot, and also in arcade machines and gambling machines, such as this board. So I did find a Chinese retailer which sells these legit for fairly cheap. So I'm kind of thinking of making like this weird monster digital synthesizer, like just all digital, but instead of using Arduino and programming it, I'm just really gonna make it more like a system like this. There's also a 6800, 6809 CPU on there, so I might use this as a controller. There's some RAM on here. These are all like really big multiplexers. It's also pretty cool, and there's hundreds of transistors on here, both PNP and NPN, including some power ones. Look at these bad boys. So yeah, I suddenly got a lot of components to make something digital. So yeah, that's another project I'll probably start working on after I finish the SQK1. So, but if you guys have any ideas for a digital synth like this, with these chips in particular, let me know. I'm still brainstorming about it. I haven't really got a clear idea yet of what it's going to be. So yeah, any suggestions are more than welcome. And who knows, maybe you can think of some really absolutely bonkers synthesizer idea together or something. I don't know. Anyways, that's really the end of this video now. I'll see you guys next video, and bye bye.